So, got a few still coming here. Good? Good? That's good. It might seem a little bit odd to be having fire talk in September, middle of September. But there's good reason behind it, and I'm going to elaborate on what that is. It seems, if you talk to some of the experts out there, fire season, and especially during drought periods, can go almost 12 months in California now. And pardon? Is that Lindsay?
That was me, sorry.
Oh, sorry. So fire seasons are getting more intense, and they're lasting longer, and they're causing more loss than we've ever seen. And this is causing a major drain on state and local funding for firefighters, and it's also causing a lot of anxiety and a lot of cost for insurance carriers. So we've been, staff was recently contacted by some local brokers in the area that help a lot of folks on the preserve find insurance. And they wanted to make us aware of some potential changes coming down the line. So some of the big carriers that we have here with Chubb, AIG, Pure, Nationwide, they have reached out and said, listen, we are looking across the state at our coverage, and I won't need that for a few minutes, but they're looking at their coverages and their liabilities across the state, and so there's the potential out there, and it's happening in other areas already where we're seeing premiums adjusted, surcharges. It's hard to get new insurance on new homes, and the broker wanted us to be aware of this. So Christy and myself and a few others that attended the meeting, Karen, we decided we better get the homeowners here and property owners here together and make sure you understood and knew that this was potentially coming as well. I think I've seen some letters personally that have gone to some homeowners talking about the need to clear and the need to prepare and so forth in advance of a potential inspection. So it's happened out there, and it's likely to happen more. The brokers are telling us it's highly likely that every home site up here will probably face an inspection within the next 6 to 12 months, if not sooner. So we wanted to be proactive and get out in front of that and make sure that you understood what that means and what you can do to prepare for that. So we had an all-entity board meeting last Friday, and Fire Chief Arcades came to that and addressed the boards and just wanted to tell them what he and his staff are seeing when they go fight fires in other areas. And he wanted to make sure he reinforced the fact that the preserve is unique and is a gold standard when it comes to fire management. And he wanted to make sure that we all understood that we should have a very good stance should an insurance carrier come in here and try to bully us in any way because of what's going on in other areas. So the fire chief, and it's great to have Chief Ulwelling here tonight. Eric, thanks for coming. He's going to be available later for anybody who wants to discuss a few things or any questions. But Monterey County Regional Fire District, who's been our partner for a lot of years, they know about our fuel management plans that we've had in place since 2005, with the help of Carol Rice, who's here tonight as well. Those have been intact since 2005, and there are lots of specific plans that every homeowner up here has to put in place, and they have to update them every 5 years. And we also, within that plan that was established in 2005, we have our roadside mowing plan, which Carol helped us identify areas along roadsides that we needed to clear or mow anywhere from 15 to 70 feet. So just keep in mind that 90% plus of fires are started by human activity. And that's one of the reasons why we focus so hard on the Rancho San Carlos corridor, because that's our most trafficked corridor. And it's also likely to happen around home sites. And so those are the areas that we have to focus our attention on. So during the Soberanes fire in 2016, we got some good and some bad. We had a lot of accolades for what we did from a mowing standpoint. Some homes got A+, some didn't. Not many, but a few didn't. But there was room to improve there. We got a lot of accolades for our water system and the ability of our water system to help fight the fire. We got a ton of accolades for the staff and the support and all those good things. But at the end of the day, there's a group out there called the Insurance, I think it's called the Insurance Service Office or something, and it is a group of experts that go around and they rate fire districts, areas within fire districts, and they provide an ISO rating. And our ISO rating pre-Sobranes was a 4. It's a scale of 1 to 10, and 10 is bad. 10 is like you're going to have a hard time insuring anything. So we were already in a good position at a 4. And then after our rating, because of what happened during the Sobranes, because of a lot of things that we did after Sobranes, which is updating and getting our fuel management plan out to every homeowner, having an emergency operations plan, a lot of the things that we did, our ISO rating went down to a 3. And I was just talking to someone a minute ago, Carol, I think, and she couldn't believe it. She's like, wow. Most places she's experiencing a 6, 7, or an 8. And so for us to have that rating is key for us when we are going through this insurance discussion. So it's something we can hang our hat on and be very proud of. So a few things that I want to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about this insurance potential that we could be under a little pressure from our insurance companies. So what are we going to do about that? So we've asked the brokers, and we've also made a few phone calls. We are inviting, and the invites are out for some insurance executives to come visit the preserve. And we'll feed them well, we'll play a little golf with them. But it's a good time to do a little show and tell, and we'll make sure they understand all of these things that I'm talking about. All of the things that have been done over years. And we'll get them out there and show them, because it's pretty astonishing. And we'll also talk to them about what's going on in the industry and some tips and some things like that. But we'll establish those relationships, so hopefully we'll preempt these inspections that way. So that's one important thing that we're doing. The next thing that we're going to do is we are asking Monterey County Regional Fire for the first time to help perform courtesy inspections for you, the homeowner. So typically outside of the preserve in the district, they will go out and they'll do what they call LE100s. And they just did one on my house last year, and they don't let you know they're coming. It's unannounced. They just come and they do a walk around, and they give you a report card on your doorknob. And it says, great job on one side, and it says, not so great job on the back. And it is a checklist, and if you get a not so good job, it's kind of like a fix-it ticket. You've got some time to come in and improve, and you know they're going to come back and re-inspect. So they do that typically outside. We have always knocked it out of the park, so to speak, but they have never felt like it's even really a worthy cause to do it up here, because everyone does such a great job. But we think now would be a great time for them, because our paramedics are up here every day from 9 to 5. And all of them, Eric was a paramedic up here for years, all of them can do these inspections. And so they're here from 9 to 5, actually 7 days a week. So what we'll do is we'll reach out to you if you don't reach out to me first, and we'll set it up to where they can come and just do a courtesy walk around. They'll come back to us with the information, and we'll report to you on how well you did. If there's some work to be done, we'll let you know if we can do it through our operations department, or if it'll take maybe a third-party contractor. So that's a very important step in this process, to have our Monterey County Regional guys come. They'll come with your fuel management plan in hand and basically just check. And this will hopefully be, again, out in front of an inspection by an insurance, and allow you the opportunity to be proactive if you choose to do so. The last thing we're going to do is, as you'll hear tonight, we have updated the fuel management plan from 2013. It's going to be the new 2018. Christy had a great suggestion once we heard from these insurance folks, said, let's update this plan. Let's get Carol involved again. Let's look at the new standards that are out there, and let's update our current plan and make sure it's up to date. And you're going to learn a lot about it. Christy's going to come up and talk a little bit about that. Carol's then going to get into some of the science and chemistry and how fire works. So it should be very interesting going forward. So thank you again for coming. At the end, we'll do Q&A. And enjoy yourself. And Christy, come take it away.
Thank you, sir. Let's see if I can figure this little clicker out. So as Forrest mentioned, the Soberanes was a really important event for this community in lots of different ways. It was just 2 years ago now. If you were here 2 years ago, September was a pretty smoky, hot month. The worst of it was past in terms of what was really threatening us, but the fire was still very much a part of our lives. We learned a lot, and I would say we are a much stronger community because of that experience. Since the Soberanes, we've now had the misfortune of observing other communities not faring nearly as well as we did. And while there's lots of reasons for that, we do recognize, particularly as we've reached out to the regional fire district, to CAL FIRE, to Carol, and to other experts, as well as kind of debriefed our own terrific team, what we've learned is that we are starting from a very good place. As Forrest mentioned, the water system during the Soberanes was flawless. It was not by accident. It was extremely well designed. And Forrest's team, the water team, was here 24/7, keeping an eye on things and making sure it ran smoothly, and it made an enormous difference to the firefighting effort. Our roads and roadside trees were undamaged, and that's because they were ready for this. Forrest, again, and his team, following Carol's roadside fuel management standards, we were ready for this. Not a single limb had to come down, to my knowledge, to get all of that amazing equipment that came up here. It was ready. And David Simpson is here tonight, and he's a lead on a lot of that, and with a terrific team associated with that. The fuel management work that we did then was, as CAL FIRE has told me several times since, the best they've seen, especially on a community level, where it's not just one person, but the entire community embracing this. Our teams were well coordinated, and as a result, the damage here was very light. But we realized a few things we wanted to hold kind of close to top of mind as we looked forward to the next fire, sadly, because they're now a relatively frequent event, at least statewide. We recognized that the Santa Lucia Preserve is a critical defense asset for firefighting. If you were here, you might remember that there were hundreds of trucks and thousands of men staging on the preserve in order to get into the backcountry and protect Carmel Valley and protect our neighbors to the south. Communications and navigation challenges were really rough. And we've talked a lot about, Forrest has put excellent communications procedures in place. We drill on them, we're training on them. But we also recognize we still need to work on getting better cell coverage out here, because that's an important part of making sure that our first responders and firefighters have the communications they need. Sustaining the relationships, all of our relationships between the fires is really important, staying on this and not kind of forgetting what we learned. The Conservancy has in the past and will continue to host training exercises here for the firefighters in partnership with the rest of the Preserve staff to help keep those relationships really strong. But we have done quite a bit since that fire, and Forrest mentioned it, so a lot of this, so I won't go over it with too much emphasis, but the updated emergency operations plan that Forrest spearheaded and this entire Preserve staff supports and helped put it in place is really terrific, and he deserves a lot of credit for that. He got that into place very quickly after the Soberanes. That plan's been adopted by the county, and we're doing drills. The updated fuel management standards was identified as another top priority for us right after the Soberanes, and we recognize that although it wasn't due to be renewed until 2020, that renewing it and refreshing it, updating it with all the lessons learned would just make this community stronger and make us safer. So almost immediately, this picture here is Dr. Christy and I out with the CAL FIRE guys who worked this side of the fire, all the way through that fire, looking at the maps and sharing information on what worked, what can we do better next time. We gathered a lot of that information together, debriefed here at the Preserve 2, brought Carol in, and worked closely with the regional fire district as well to update those standards. And they are now updated. We got the chief signed them Friday, and I signed them today. So we have those in hand. That is going to be a great tool for talking to the insurance companies, as well as improving our level of safety. The Conservancy, it says SLC here, but the Conservancy team of our 7 members, now 3 have red card certification as wildland firefighters. We're now better able to support especially rapid response to the early elements of an incident. And we're expanding our grazing, and the CSD is expanding its mowing along Rancho San Carlos and other areas. So collectively, that's a lot that we're doing to stay safe, but there's more that we can do. We're looking into the future. We want to continue to do cooperative efforts with the Community Services District, the Regional Fire, CAL FIRE, and our neighbors. Our neighbors are terrific all the way around the preserve, whether we're talking about regional parks or the Big Sur Land Trust or the private ranches in the back. We all talk a lot more now about staying safe and about regional fuel breaks and regional weed management in ways we never did before the fire. We're expanding, as I mentioned, we're reinstituting our prescribed burn program, and that's one of the reasons that our team just got certified. Pretty excited about that. It's a really important tool in the toolbox. We'll obviously be including the community in all of the planning. You will hear about it long before it happens. And rather than, it won't be just a card on your door, oh, by the way, we're burning your backyard tomorrow. These are very specifically thought out, clearly, carefully planned and very targeted burns. But they're not only going to make the preserve safer, they're going to give us a big leg up on the weeds, but they're going to keep our partnerships in place and have our teams working together. Doing more coordinated weed and fuel management. We've been working with so many of you. I look out in the audience, and we're working with so many of you on weeds in your open lands and your homelands, and we will continue to do that. We know that we need to do a better job of understanding the interrelationship between weed management and fuel management, and make sure that we're being very, first of all, well informed, and then very intentional and effective in our communications on when to treat fuel and weeds and how. But most important, and the thing we're mostly here tonight to talk about, is we need your help. The reason we got that A rating through the Preserve Rise fire, and the reason, I think so many of us slept much better at night than we might have, not that much of us got that much sleep during the sober runs, but the firefighters, the responders, every day told me, your home, we are not worried about losing a home on the preserve. Your homes are in great shape because of these lot-specific fuel management plans that are being implemented so effectively. So we now have an updated set of standards that guides those plans. Most of the people in the room have these plans. Some of them are out of date. If they've been recently updated, you do not need to update them again. We can talk more about that in a little while. But if you're wondering how long ago it was, we actually can answer that question tonight if you're interested, or we can get it to you later. But Lindsay Cope right here in the center has a list of all the fuel management plans and when they were done. But what is most important, even if it's old, is to go forward and go ahead and implement that. And so I would like to introduce Carol Rice, our fire guru, who all the way back in 2005 has helped us put together these plans and helped us implement them in a way that has created such a terrific outcome. Carol is a certified wildlands fire manager. She is also an ecologist. She understands how this Central Coast region knits together ecologically. That in turn, I think, informs even better fuel management plans, and it keeps it sustainable, cost efficient, and effective. And also something that preserves our property values and our watershed values in other ways. We don't want to see this place unnecessarily opened up and cleared of vegetation. We want to make sure that we're doing this smart as well as right. So Carol, come on up and tell us a little more about what you've done, please.
And thank you for the kind words. So yeah, let's talk about, I'm going to give you a quick preview about what I'm going to talk about. First of all, the most important thing that you do is actions before the fire. More homes are saved during a fire before the fire. In other words, what you do now, it sets the stage for a successful outcome. So that's a key point. new standards are actually a forefront of what you may see in codes later on. So we've included everything that's in the codes and then some. So this gives you ammunition for talking to the insurance companies that you're better than the codes are requiring. So this is something to take home, and I'll go over some of those specifics during this talk. And then I'm going to give you some guidance on how some of these standards are applied with special emphasis on trees. Okay, so why do you do fuel management? You're actually changing fire behavior. And this is a big take-home message. Of all the kinds of catastrophes, wildland fire is the one thing that we can change. We can't change the hurricane that's hitting the East Coast. We can't change earthquakes, but we can change fire behavior. And this is how you do it. You, by mowing the grass, you limit the ignition potential. By doing fuel treatment, you're actually changing the fire behavior so that it doesn't burn so hot. Those flames aren't going to be as great if you have just a little bit of leaf litter and not a whole lot of brush. And then you're going to limit fire spread by separating some of those fuels. So you really are changing fire behavior before the fire occurs. So, these generally are, what you do is you're reducing the amount of fuel that can burn. You know, when you put another log on a fire, you're making that fire hotter. And so conversely, when you take that log away, it's not going to burn so hot. So you're reducing the fuel volume, you're changing the structure of the fuels. You're making it such that the fire can't reach the tree canopy by doing this work before it. You're actually affecting the chemistry of the plants by taking out bad plants like chamise that burn so hot and favoring plants that are more fire resistant. And amazingly, you're increasing the moisture of the fuels without adding a drop of water. It turns out when you take out dead material, everything that's dead is 10 times drier than anything that's living. So if you take out all the dead material, the whole combination has an average moisture content that's way higher. So you're actually making it harder for a fire to spread because you've got moist fuels without adding a drop of water. So that's pretty cool. All right, so I'm going to do a little bit of myth busting. We're all really worried about flames. You see them in the TV and movies, and it's very dramatic. And flames are really, don't get me wrong, they really burn hot and they're really dangerous. And it's influenced by topography. So anything that is uphill of a burning flame will be superheated and ready to go much easier. And the flames are produced by vegetation around your house. So it's kind of interesting that your siding is probably the most vulnerable aspect for flame impingement is what we call. But the main thing is, it burns up really quickly. So here's an example. We did tests in a burning chamber, and we burned up some junipers. And so here is the actual test. 5 minutes in, they took the plant. They started the flames and had everything heat up for 5 minutes. Then they added the plants. So this is actually, they've only been burning for 33 seconds, and now this is after 90 seconds. So the point is that flames are really quick moving, and then it will, and it's short-lived. So they don't last for a very long time. But the real reason why a lot of the homes are being burned up is through embers. And they're finding that more and more of these catastrophic destructions in Santa Rosa and other places is actually through embers. So we're paying a lot of attention to that in our fuel management standards. And these embers often ignite in inside corners, like right by where your sliding door might enter a deck, and on decks right in the crevices. So that's, the little things can coalesce and then smolder and then start a fire long after people think that the fire has moved on. So, and it's also a problem when they penetrate vents, and so we're especially interested in good vents and retrofitting for that. Okay, so here are treatments. We call them prescriptions, kind of like the doctor does. If you will, the physical dimensions, how wide we are going to ask for treatments. It's kind of like your dosage. Your timing your treatment and frequency is whatever you're, kind of like a doctor. So our prescriptions or our standards deal with how wide to do the treatments. Maybe 30 feet for grass, 150 feet for woodlands, 200 feet for shrubs. We talk about what you actually need to treat. Do you mow? Do you prune? That's the strata. And we talk about what is to be retained. And here's a tip. In other places you may see, well, take out half of it. Well, we don't talk about what is removed because after it's gone, you don't know how much you removed. All you know is how much is left. So all of our standards are based on how much is going to be left so you can do an inspection afterwards. If we say, have 50% of the shrubs, of the land will be covered with shrubs, you can see that. All right. So timing a treatment, we talk about we want to mow the grass after, just as it's starting to cure when it turns brown, hopefully after the wildflowers have set seed. We talk about timing of treatments of there are better times to prune trees or not prune trees. This is all covered in the standards. And then we also discuss the frequency of treatments. Mowing, you have to do it every year, but oftentimes tree trimming and shrub groupings can be refreshed maybe on a 5 or 3 year interval. So special discussions regarding trees. We want to make sure that the flames do not reach the tree canopy because that's where a lot of the embers are produced and can be dispersed. So here's a red ribbon example of these limbs. The tree limbs are limbed up, maybe not to 8 feet, maybe a second place instead of a first place. But here on the preserve, there are a lot of the limbs of the trees should be and are pruned up very nicely to 8 feet so that any fire that comes through in the bottom will not get up into the tree canopy. You can see conversely that if there was a roadside ignition, if this truck started a fire, there would be really a good chance that all of these trees would be completely consumed in a fire because of the connectivity. So we call it a fire ladder, and that's when the bushes and the small trees and the taller trees are all continuous. So we're creating a vertical discontinuity or separation. So we have a bunch of rules in the standards, and I want to go over these special details of it. So we're asking for branches under 8 feet, but are bigger than 3 inches in diameter to be pruned. So here's some examples. This branch that is under 8 feet, we would remove that one. This one that is, this branch that's coming down, we would remove that one because it's coming down to below the 8 foot level. This one, here's a branch that is going up. We're not going to cut it here, we're going to cut it here because this is the only branch that is going down. So we're trying to keep all of as much of the tree canopy as we can intact, and especially paying attention and leaving the larger branches. Because it's really the small branches and the small leaves that are more apt to catch fire. So here's an example. Here's a tree that has not yet been treated. So of course we would ask that the smaller branches of the larger stem be removed, and that's pretty obvious. But here we've got a big long branch that's coming out, and another one that's further down that's dead. Well, if it's dead, we do have to remove the dead branch, and I'd cut it off right here. Whereas this branch, it's starting to turn up, and we would look very carefully at all of the opportunities for the tree branch to come up. And that's important because a lot of the property values and the beauty of the sites are these magnificent big branches that are low to the ground. So we want to retain them when they can and still not compromise fire safety. And in this circumstance, because this is less than 8 feet from the ground, we would require in the fuel management standards that there be absolutely no grass underneath. It has to be cut really, really short and hopefully less than like a 1-inch layer of leaf litter. So we have to be pretty meticulous, but it's because we value these larger branches. Okay, so we've got a bunch of zones. We have a non-combustible zone right next to the house. We have a defensible space zone, which is further out. And then my mantra is, it's most important to work from the house out and the ground up. It's really important to do very good work next to the house, and actually less important to do work further away. So here's this non-combustible zone, and this is an example of where the standards are going beyond what is in the code. But in talking with other fire prevention officers in the next code cycle that's coming up next year, there is a very good chance that this will be in next year's code. So, and that's this non-combustible zone, we're finding over and over again that if you have this hardscaping right next to the house, those embers aren't going to get next to your house, which means you're not going to have flame impingement right next to your house. It also means that you're not going to have embers that might get really close to underneath the weep screen, I think I said it right, between the stucco and the actual framing of the house. So lots of opportunities to bolster your protection. And in contrast, we're hearing that the insurance companies are going to ask for a long distance of treatments. And that's what I think is too much of, what could maybe not a good thing, but it's too much of clearance. Here's an example where the homes are way up in the top, and if this bush were to ignite, it would burn with pretty good intensity and maybe cast a little bit of embers. But what's really important is what the homeowner is going to do at the top here, because there's really not much linkage between how this area burns and that area burns. The grass may continue the fire, but if you've cut the grass up here, that's the part that matters. Okay, so we also have a special condition regarding large logs. Large logs are kind of important because they are they foster insects and all sorts of good critters, and they're actually a moisture retention. They keep the soil moist and the area around it. Pretty cool. So this one also hasn't been treated. What we're asking is that if this were underneath the tree canopy, well, it's not going to be good. You need to keep it, to either move it out from underneath the tree canopy, but if it's outside the tree canopy, then to remove all the little stuff around it, all the kindling that might catch that big log on fire. And if you do so, it's pretty impervious to bursting into big flames. If I were to throw this big log, or a small piece of the log, on a campfire all by itself, not going to do anything. So we need that continuity of sizes. We need a small and then medium and branches to get that big log on fire. So we're trying to break up that continuity of sizes. So we're going to isolate it from tree canopies, we're going to isolate it from different bushes, and isolate it from smaller pieces of equipment. And then the cool thing is, when it decomposes, when you kick it and it falls apart, you got to get rid of it. All right, so the last bit is about tree canopies in oak woodlands. You may see guidelines in other places that say your trees have to, the canopy of the trees have to be separated by about 10 feet. It doesn't work, and it's not scientifically justified in oak woodlands. All of those guidelines were set up for conifers. So that I would advise you not to do that. And in fact, if you do open up the canopy, then that means that you've got more shrubs. They have more light, and they're going to grow more, and the shrubs are really the issue in creating more flames. So don't do it. All right. So to reinforce the important message is, be especially attentive to the area right around the house, and work from the ground up. So from the house out, ground up. Those are things we can think about over and over again. And make sure your tree canopies are still intact to keep that shade, to keep the coolness. It actually reduces wind speed too. And then manage separate your plants and shrubs especially, so that the fire has a hard time moving from one shrub to the next, or from the bottom to the tree canopy. And then continue your excellent work, because as I said, you guys make the difference. It is the fate of your house in a fire is in your hands. So with that, I'm going to give it back to Christy. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. And we're just about to wrap up, and then we'll have a chance for lots of questions if you need them, or if you're interested. Bet you got some. So I am not going to read you this slide, but I want to let you know that we do have a list of or a summary of the changes between the 2013 fuel management standards and the 2018. And this information will go into the cover letter that'll go out to all of you along with the standards, so you can hand them off to your insurance agents just in case you need to do that. But one of the things, I think, if we just flash to the bottom, and Carol touched on this a little bit, the new standards increase flexibility for people in their homelands and within 30 feet of the structures. It clarifies, I think, very well the tree pruning standards and the requirements for removing dead wood. You know, there's been some lack of clarity on the part of the Conservancy, and the way I've communicated that, I think this is really going to help. It adds some new standards for leaf litter and for mowing under trees that I think are really going to improve the quality of the fuel management in some of our heavily wooded areas and reduce the pressure on you to thin your trees or open up those canopies. But I just want to mention that Carol's work on this has been really diligent. It's been really a treat to hear from her what she knows about these, what she's learned from all these other fires. So, last 4 points. Please do reach out to us and help us help you update your lot-specific fuel management plans. We have a list tonight here if you want to know whether you're ready for an update. Just because we have 2018 standards does not mean you have to update plans that aren't ready to be updated. Those plans are good for about 5 years. The 2013 standards are still better than the state average, or better than the state requirements. So don't feel pressure to update. But if your plan is more than 5 years old, we absolutely should update it now. Contact Forrest if you'd like to be proactive and have the chief come out or one of the paramedics come out and do that courtesy inspection at LE 100. And Eric is here to answer questions on that and can go into some detail. Please contact Resident Services, Jen O'Hara and the team, if you want to implement your fuel management plan. Of course, you can work with your own contractors, but Resident Services is a terrific place to start that process. And as always, please let us know what else we can do to help you, because this is your community, it's our community, but working together is how we're going to keep it safe. So with that, I'll invite Forrest and perhaps the chief and Carol to come on up, and we'll just take any questions.
Before we do that,
Yeah.
just if anyone's on the phone, we'll try to repeat the questions for those on the phone, but also we'll put this slide presentation on the web tomorrow, and if you like to see things twice, you can look at it again, but especially for those on the phone that didn't get to see it. So Howard, I'll start with you, you're on the front row.
Yeah, well, this is a question, I think, for Carol.
Okay.
Our situation, we have an oak forest behind our house, and the canopies are pretty well connected all the way to the house. But we done a pretty good job, Dave Simpson can verify this, I guess, of keeping the fuel down, probably under maybe 50 yards or so up the hill. And but we have, part of that canopy actually hangs over the house itself, which is a Spanish tile roof. So my question is, are we vulnerable if we keep the fuel down below, clear below the canopy?
So the question is a person that has a continuous canopy on an oak woodland that goes over their house vulnerable from wildfire if they've removed the understory fuels for 150 feet or more? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
His canopy's not sloped from the house.
Oh, even better.
That's right.
Okay, cool. So first of all, thinking about the house first, the biggest problem with the oak woodland having it be over your house, if there are any branches over the house, is the leaf litter on the roof and in the gutters and in the valley. So it's the little things. Further away, it's not as bad, especially because the oak forest is above your house. So if a fire you're worried about a fire coming into your house, it would have to come down the hill, which is there's no preheating in that circumstance. So that's one good thing. And the other good thing is, in fires to keep to travel through the tree canopy, it has to be supported by fire from below. If you don't have any fire from below, and if you remove the fuels you won't, then the fire actually drops down to the ground. And they've seen that time and time again. So it's pretty powerful. You have to, if you remove the fuel and the fire underneath the tree canopy, it drops down to the ground. So then you're burning in leaf litter. That answer your question?
Yeah.
Dave Watts, I think you were next. Go ahead.
A question on the road, Forrest, is for you. The main road, you see, main roads in, let's say, the highways are disked with a ribbon in most of the farmlands along the major highways. We don't do that. We mow short. Have you thought about disking a band along Rancho San Carlos Road?
No, I haven't thought about that because it would be a pretty ugly sight, I think.
It would be an ugly sight.
But number two, that's going to foster the invasives and all the things. We're trying to mow it 4 inches to encourage our native grasses. That's the most, I think, important thing we can do because those are, in a sense, those are the ones that are the least likely to cause fuel issues. And so I think we've seen a lot of success with our mowing program. Let's face it, some of our biggest dangers is someone flicking a cigarette out the window, right? And so the most important thing there, I think disking would be premium in that, but I think we'd sacrifice so much of our beauty of our entrance and so forth to do that. I see the same thing on Highway 101 and just all around areas where they just need to bulldoze it or they keep it disked. But that'd be my comment on that. I do think you can.
And this
Go
is
ahead.
my sort of unending refrain, Forrest. Robinson Canyon worries me.
Yep.
It's a real mess. There's a lot of fuel on the sides. Do we have, or can we have any impact there? Is there anything we can do as a community?
Yeah, quite honestly, I just happened to have a good conversation with Chief Arcades. He's going to be, and you can, Eric's a division chief as well. They have a lot of push, I think, and pull on where the county goes and helps mow in those areas. I personally want to use that leverage and see if we can't offer to do the mowing ourselves. Next year we're going to have some, I won't go into detail, but we're going to have some extra help on a third-party contractor that's going to help us do some of our mowing. Our goal is going to be to get all mowing done, first wave at minimum, by July 4th. And I want Robinson Canyon at least from the San Clemente gate all the way to the Pinon gate, maybe even further down a little bit.
Because below that it gets hard to mow along the
It's pretty
sides.
tough
It's
down
steep
there.
and,
Yeah,
but somebody flicks a cigarette out there and that's.
yeah. Sandy, go ahead.
So our concern is the vacant lots. On the Mesa, we have a number of them, and Rick and I walk it. The other night we walked it, and all of the examples you gave of layers and kindling, we have that in space. And it's incredibly dangerous. And I know there's a lot of contractors that will, come within the area, they'll take a break out there,
Yeah.
one cigarette, and we are in big trouble. And we found a lot of cigarette butts,
I know,
we get
I
the
know.
pictures, we collect them on the walks. So who's enforcing cleanup of those vacant lots?
So here's the real deal. So the Public Resource Code is what drives most of these enforcements, if you will. And so the Public Resource Code clearly states and kicks in when there's a structure on the property. Without a structure, there's not a lot of teeth in what you can and can't have a property owner do. We encourage as much mowing, at least annually mowing, and because a lot of these lots have a fire hydrant at the end of the driveway. And if the fire folks can get to that fire hydrant, and Christy and I are talking about this today, and they can turn around, it becomes an access point for them. So this is more education and more encouragement, but it has been difficult. I will tell you this, we have some idle owners that have their lot for sale or whatever it might be, and I know real estate helps us a lot because they like for that lot to be nice and clean when they show it. So I understand exactly what you're saying, and I think what we're going to try to do is identify some vacant lots. Some vacant lots that are empty, if you mowed them, it probably wouldn't have an impact either way. There's some of those that are isolated, but there are some that would affect adjacent lots, and I think we're going to have some further conversations and some stronger discussions with those.
Yeah, it's
owners.
not just mowing though, I mean, it's.
Oh, it's clearing, it's fuel management.
Yeah,
It-
and
You're right.
then just one clarification, I'm hearing you mention 150 feet, but before it was 100 feet, where are we now?
It's 100 feet, but there's a talk out there that there's discussions about, I've heard, that CAL FIRE may encourage 150 and may actually make the new standard. Have you heard that?
Well, the fuel management standards do ask for 150 feet in oak woodlands and in oak woodlands with shrubs. Actually, 200 feet for shrubby fuel types, which are North Coastal Scrub and Chaparral. So those are the preserve fuel management standards and not code. So the code says 100 feet, and then that the chief has discretion to ask for more. Yes.
Sandy, I'll just add one more thing to that as well, which is,
Christy, I didn't repeat that question.
oh, I'm sorry.
Can you at least?
Yes, so for the people on the phone, if I got it all right, and Sandy will let me know if I didn't, there's a concern that many of the lots, or some of the lots at least, that are not currently built are not undertaking any fuel management standards. And some of those, even the homelands of those lots have gotten quite wild, and along the driveways as well. And where that can sometimes lead to a concern in Sandy's neighborhood is if contractors are in the area or there's work going on in the area, people are stepping out to take a cigarette. You find cigarette butts in those relatively wild areas, and it poses a risk for the entire neighborhood. Sandy, did I get that right?
Yep.
Yes, thank you.
Is that not a no-no?
It is. So a couple more things I wanted to add.
I mean, the
Actually,
cigarette business.
Kelly Dyer's here. He was earlier. I'm not sure if he was able to stay. There you are. Kelly may want to speak to this as well, but I think there are 3 points I'll make briefly on this. One is the design, through the design review process and the construction guidelines, there's supposed to be very specific places where smoking is allowed. It has to be in a very safe place. And Kelly can provide more information on that. And both Kelly's team and our team goes out to those construction sites and checks in very regularly to make sure they're following the rules. So if you're finding, and I understand, Sandy, you've let people know that you're finding cigarette butts, I will help chase that down, because there are typically maybe 1 or 2 contractors, perhaps they're new, or their subs haven't worked out before, haven't gotten the memo, and we just need to have a talk. But it's specific to the untreated lots. Forrest and I have been talking about this, and this has been a concern for a while, but I think more so as we've really begun to focus on these plans, we really need to reach out, even if it's on a one-by-one basis, to these owners and make sure they're at least keeping the 15 feet along each side of their driveway clear and their homelands clear. And we will encourage them to do that and see if we can get some more energy placed in that direction. We're also going to work with Chief Arcades and his team to see whether there are certain lots that are more important than others, where maybe there's water access or maybe there's a staging area. And we have the ability, I believe, and we'll go ahead and look at this, to make even a more specific request to those landowners, because the community's safety may depend on keeping those open. So we're being very thoughtful about how we want to approach that element. So thank you, and please do keep bringing it up, because that's how it gets taken care of, but it is important.
Can you address
Oh, yes.
the 100 versus 200 feet? Please.
Yes, and the chief wants to speak, and then I'll speak.
Great.
Hi, everybody. Eric Ulwelling, Division Chief with Monterey County Regional Fire. Really a privilege to be here tonight. The chief said it was happy hour at 5 o'clock. He didn't tell me there was going to be a presentation. So, I'm making the best of it. Just listening to the presentation tonight, my observation is that you have an incredibly skilled team managing fuels, managing the risk of fire. And I'd like to acknowledge, having been a long-term firefighter here, I'd like to acknowledge the people that are here in the room, because they are doing an amazing job. So let's give them a hand. Just from the boots on the ground perspective, I travel a lot now to fires all over the state. In January, I was in the largest fire in the history of California, the Thomas Fire, which has since been superseded by the Mendocino Complex. So every year, we're getting the largest fire ever. And what I'm hearing today, it's incredibly valid and it's pertinent, but we're also, literally and figuratively speaking, we're in the weeds. The big picture is this is an incredibly fire-safe community. It really is. Your homes are non-combustible. They're sprinklered. You have experts who give a very relevant and sophisticated interpretation of how to manage the fuels. So you have a lot of advantages in this community. You know, 10 years ago, I was working for Chief Simpson, and the fire service was kind of about what my department is doing. What is my agency doing? That terminology has changed. It's now we. We recognize the fire problem is so sophisticated and so complex that we've transitioned from a perspective of what can one agency do to what is a multi-agency response. So the first whiff of smoke that occurs on the Santa Lucia Preserve, we're getting an enormous amount of resources, not only coming from Monterey County Regional, but from agency partners. We're getting aircraft launched to this area with tankers, heli-tac, helicopters, hand crews, literally on the initial dispatch. So you're talking about a mobilization of resources that no one agency can sustain, and it's because we've recognized we've got to be in this together. So to that end, feel free to pass this around and look at it. We have recognized the need that if there is a major fire in the area, we're going to have agencies from other parts of the state coming in. We have pre-incident maps that we've built for every zone in the district. So if you're an incident commander or a battalion chief bringing in a strike team from Los Angeles County, you think, how could that possibly happen? It can happen. So instead of going in blind, we're using technology, we're using resources, we're giving them relevant, meaningful information about the topography and the communities that they're coming into. And it makes a huge difference. So we're using every advantage we can to address the changing conditions. And from my perspective, from a boots on the ground perspective, you're in a wonderful spot with not only talented people, but people who are genuinely interested in addressing this problem. And feel free to ask me any questions, but I'll hand back the mic to Christy.
Christy?
Yes, hang on a minute, David. Sandy and Cindy, just wanted one point of clarification further, I think, on those zones, on the, is it 100, is it 150, what is it? So one of the reasons that this is working, I guess one of the most powerful elements of our fuel management program here is that we don't just have a preserve-wide standard that really lays out the big picture stuff that Carol just walked us through. We also have the lot-specific plans for every property that takes into account the specifics of slope and aspect and fuel moisture and sun exposure and fuel types. And those lot-specific plans, many of which Carol has produced, and there's a pretty rigorous set of criteria for which consultants are even qualified to produce these lot-specific plans. They are designed to lower your the flame height to 2 feet or under. And they will take those zones out as far as they need to do that, to change the behavior, as Carol suggested, so that in the unfortunate event that a flame started moving towards your house, it was down to a very slow and low temperature flame by the time it reaches the things we care about, like our homes and the access egress points of the roads. So the line moves depending on the need of the lot. And that is blind to homeland, open land boundaries in terms of your own property. If it extends out onto another landowner's property, then the Conservancy will work with you to connect with that person and coordinate with them. And hopefully they'll give permission to take it out that far. But certainly within your own property, we work with you to get it done. So, David, I think you've already
Well,
touched on it.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to reverse the compliment. Having been close to the edge of the Sub-Uranus fire and having had a truck at our house for 4 days straight, 24 hours a day, thank you for that support that you gave this community.
Yeah. Soberanes fire started, I happened to be working on the preserve, and I went to Halls Ridge. I hiked up Halls Ridge. I called one of our chief officers and I said, I see smoke near the coast, and I was told, yep, CAL FIRE is aware of it, and then you know the rest is history. What I do want to say is every single day I work with David and I work with Forrest, and the resources that were committed by the SLP and the really incredible 24-hour commitment down to the cooks and the chefs and the groundskeepers. I mean, it was all hands on deck for a very long period of time. So you've got an incredibly committed group of people here.
Dennis, yeah?
Can I direct this at Forrest, please?
Yes, you may.
I knew you would too. Let me have it.
Yeah. You're making a big mistake, okay? I noticed earlier when you mentioned to flip the cigarettes out, that we know no preserve member is doing that. It's all has to be
Right.
contractors. Are there any practical restraints or oversight that you can give to the guy driving down the street and throwing the cigarette out the window?
So we have a pre-construction meeting where we try to get the supervisors involved, and then after that it's pure chaos on the construction site with all the subs coming in. There's so many things that we try to reinforce, whether it's the cigarette issue or whether it's speeding, or it just goes on and on and on, and it's very hard to disseminate the information down. So what we try to do is we try to visit the sites. But what I tell folks too, and Sandy and I have had this conversation because she's probably picked up more, her and Rick have picked up more cigarette butts than anybody in the preserve. It's so hard to manage because it's from the gatehouse to wherever they're going. They're in a car. It's a quick flick out the window. It's just so difficult, and it's a shame that it happens. And we do our best to communicate as much as we can. What I think the best thing that we can do, and I encourage this has happened twice in my 20 years, where someone has seen someone flip a cigarette out the window and has got their license plate. That person comes back to work the next day, and we threw 2 people off the site permanently, not to ever come back for doing that. So that's really eyes and ears and everyone playing a role in that. It is really difficult.
And has anybody looked at the practicality of the cameras?
I guess that's a possibility. You have to camera throughout the road, and where technology.
If nothing else, they're fake, and you have a sign.
You put a fake camera.
We've got DNA. They can
DNA off.
the 23andMe spit before they work. You pick up, Sandy picks up the cigarette butts. No. Yeah.
I haven't thought of that one yet.
I was evacuated 9 days. I want that.
Just to add one more thing on the construction site thing, because there is the smoking on construction sites, more so on the construction sites, especially when it's busy right towards the end, when you've got your landscaper and your finish guys and the architect's team is out, and all of a sudden, as you know, if you've been through it, right there at the end you may have more vehicles than you can handle, and they're pulling off into the grass, they're pulling off under the trees and out of areas that have been designated for parking.
I understand how the construction site can be monitored. Right? Since our biggest exposure is to and from.
Understood, Dennis, I do get that. But I was just going to offer that for those who are having work done on their homes, you can really help this whole community by asking your contractors to move the cars. We're out a couple times a week, but we don't always catch it. And I find that the contractors are very, typically, are very attentive to the desires of the owners. And if you let them, if the owners let the contractors know, please ask your guys, don't smoke on the way out. Save your smoke till the gate, or keep their windows closed if they're smoking. Those tips that you can provide your contractors will really help also.
Bill?
For Carol, please. Carol, it's really nice to finally see you in person. You've been such a figure in the history of the preserve in our trying to reduce our vulnerability to fire. When we on the Conservancy Board asked you in 2005 to look at our vulnerability of fire on the preserve, We also ask you about vulnerability of the preserve to fire coming onto the preserve from outside the preserve. And as I recall, your words were fires coming out of the Los Padres National Forest were best stopped on the ridges to the south of here. Well, of course, with the Sobranos fire, that didn't happen. So I'd be very interested in how you assess that prospect now in light of the experience of the Sobranos fire. Is it just mission impossible to stop it up there on those ridges, or are there more steps that we could encourage public agencies to take up there to try to reduce the risk of fires coming onto the preserve from the south?
Okay, so the question for those of you on the phone was, what about the fires that are coming out of the preserve that are threatening the preserve, especially from the south? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So off the top of my head, I would say that the issue with the Sobranos fire and every large fire goes back to the new lesson that we learned, embers. So you're going to have embers that cross a line, and I know ahead of time that the fire departments create a very large box of, we'd like to have the containment be here, and I suspect it was stop it at the ridge line, but then they had to move the box because of embers. And I'd welcome your comments on that part. But as far as after the fire, now that it has burned, there is still a lot of fuel that hasn't been burned, and now it's dead, so it's possibly set for a reburn. And probably one of the worst things about having a big fire all at once is it sets the stage for the same footprint burning again. You've heard that once a fire burns in one footprint, it's likely to burn that same footprint again. And now we have a big fire, and it's all going to be uniform, and that's the issue. Won't happen right away. Won't happen, for maybe 10, 20 years. But I would love to have your opinion on it as well.
Sure. Thank you, Carol. Just to kind of validate the comments that Carol is making, if anyone has ever seen a fire history map, not only of Monterey County, but of California, she's exactly right. Fires do tend to burn in places where there's an alignment of fuel and topography and weather conditions that result in there being receptive to fire. So the Los Padres National Forest is one of those places. For those who've been around for a long time, I'm sure David can speak to this. Going back to the Marble Cone Fire, which was in 76, 77. There's a long history of fire burning in the Los Padres. Not to Monday morning quarterback, but I will say I know for a fact that there are fire breaks that have been put in place a long time ago. And it's sometimes difficult when a large agency comes in to communicate the expertise that people who live in the area have, and to communicate this is what has worked in the past. We have these lines in place, we have these strategies in place. We believe we have a good understanding of what the fire is going to do. And there are sometimes conflicts at the incident management level as to we're going to go with your plan or we have our own plan. So there is a lot of local knowledge, and there are steps to mitigate fire spread that are in place. I know for a fact there are dozer lines behind White Rock. There are dozer lines that run really all the way out to the ocean, and those can be reopened and expanded to offset any advance of fire.
So I want to add one more thing. So being Pollyanna and the good news of having a fresh start, if you will, on this landscape is that you can build on that. If the agencies really do institute a bigger prescribed fire program, they can break up that big landscape into smaller pieces and create larger fuel treated areas. I don't want to just call them fuel breaks because that's sometimes linear, but larger areas of treated that can stop a fire and slow a fire up before it gets to the ridge line. And then at the ridge line, you're not going to have the ember cast over. So it is an opportunity, and it's actually a short window of an opportunity. Within the next 10 years, we need to change the trajectory of vegetation growth on the Soberana so that it won't happen again.
Just very briefly on that point, and then I imagine we'll just want to take a couple more, and then Carol's going to stay, so we can continue conversations afterwards too. But I wanted to mention that since the Soberanes, the Conservancy and the district and the Resource Conservation District and many of our neighbors have gotten together and with CAL FIRE and have been talking a lot about how to identify which of the new lines that were put in should be kept and maintained, how we might maintain those, how we might pay for that. The Resource Conservation District was just awarded a grant that we all contributed towards pitching to the state. About a week ago, I think we got the notice for 3 years of fire and fuel management coordinator for this area to help us. We have actually already done quite a lot in the way of mapping those fuel lines, or the dozer lines, and the burn areas, and the areas that burn less hot when there's patches of heavier, residual fuel. But we now have a coordinator who's going to help us pull all that information together and work as a team to identify the optimal prescribed burn areas, bring the resources together to do that. So it's about $250,000 that'll come right into this area and help us do that over the next 3 years. Because you're right, it's a narrow window. If we can get this right now, while we've still got the energy and we've got the teamwork, we'll be much better positioned for the next fire. So that's a priority for us. I see Jim Andrasic in the back. Hang on a minute. Jim, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yes, I've heard and read a lot about prescribed burns and being really nasty perhaps for the future. And you just sort of skipped over in your presentation about the new qualifications that the Conservancy has. But do you have any kind of a rough plan that you can describe for the coming 12 or 24 months?
Great. Thank you, Jim. So the question was, we've all been hearing a lot about the importance of prescribed fire. He noted that I skipped very quickly over prescribed fire in my presentation and the new qualifications of the Conservancy staff in that regard, and what can we share right now about our plan for that over the next 24 months. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Roughly. So I'm sorry that Dr. Christie's not here tonight. She's making a different presentation out in Carmel Valley tonight, so she couldn't join us. She is our prescribed fire lead for the organization. She is working with CAL FIRE and Regional Fire and the CSD and our team to put together burn plans for, I'm not going to get the number right, but it's somewhere in the rough order of half a dozen potential prescribed burns on the preserve over the next 3 years perhaps. These are small scale. They tend to be in the 3 to 10 acre size, so they're strategically located to meet specific goals. So she has not yet put together plans that are ready to share. I don't think she wants to make sure that we've got all the resources in place and we've got the sign-off, buy-in from the agencies before we start to socialize those. But she's pretty far along in that planning process. So we're pretty excited. Absolutely.
As it relates to prescribed burns, I will let you know these are not hastily put together plans. These are very, very carefully orchestrated maneuvers that involve a lot of contingencies, typically an abundance of ground and air resources in place. We're working, the fire district, which covers the Santa Lucia Preserve, we're close to 400 square miles, so it's a very large district. Part of our jurisdiction falls onto the Bureau of Land Management and the former Fort Ord, and we're working with the Presidio Fire Department to conduct a fairly large-scale, probably 400-acre prescribed burn for the purpose of removing fuels for unexploded ordnance. Probably not an issue that the SLP is dealing with, hopefully not. But the amount of planning that goes into it and the expertise and the layer upon layer of contingencies really, I can't say guarantees a successful burn, but we try to keep the excitement down.
Yes, exactly. Okay, Alan, and then I see Karen. Yes.
Having spent a lot of time flying over California interesting is that we've totally gotten away from any kind of underbrush management and selective logging. That keeps the level of fuel down to prevent, hopefully, the big fires. And I don't see any discussion about it. I don't see any movement back towards any of that. We're still outsourcing a lot of our logging to Canada. And a little bit of trimming is helpful.
Indeed. I'm going to let Carol respond.
So the good news is,
Do you think that the people on the phone may have
thank you. So the question was, what about doing some thinning and especially some small tree thinning or underbrush thinning to keep to reduce the fire behavior, speed, and flame lengths in a fire. So the good news is Governor Brown has said he is going to give out, and the legislature has agreed, $165 million a year for fire hazard reduction. $35 million of that is going to go towards prescribed burning, but, and help me with the math, the rest of it is going to go for thinning and logging and all sorts of different fire hazard reduction treatments. So there's a commitment on the state level, and there is excitement from the National Forest Service about these kinds of treatments on large scale in the Tahoe Basin and up towards north of that too. So it's getting a lot of traction. We're finding some challenges in finding the people who still know how to do that, and then mills that can take the material. So, but there is an investment from the state and real movement on that, which I think is great news.
Yeah, that's an encouraging piece of it.
Yes.
Pertinent to your question, exactly a week ago I came back from a fire up near the Oregon border, north of Redding, on the Sierra, or Trinity Shasta Trinity National Forest, called the Hose Fire. It was there for 15 days, and we were actually working in conjunction with Sierra Pacific, with the logging company. So it was really a side-by-side. They were harvesting, we were fighting fire. And there is quite a bit of logging going on federal lands. So I think that if there was a trend, it's the pendulum is swinging the other direction where there's planned forest management.
Thank you. Maybe one more with Karen, and then I'll say that if there are more questions after that, please come forward and we'll continue to chat. But I want to release people for dinner if that's okay.
This is somewhat an extension of the discussion. Santa Rosa was devastating and a surprise fire. Mendocino Complex, surprising and devastating. These fuel management standards that we talk about putting in place here, and perhaps some of these other methods, would they have changed that, or are those different types of fires, and is there something else that makes our fuel management work for us but not for them, or are there lessons we should learn from that maybe we think we're safe but we're not?
That's a great question. I was on the Tubbs Fire and the Pocket Fire in the Santa Rosa area last year, and I think that's going to be an incident that will be studied for a very long time. I believe in that, for example, take Coffee Park, which was a subdivision of Santa Rosa across 6 lanes of Highway 101, absolutely moonscaped, 2,000 homes burned, and if you were to ask me, is this a fire-safe neighborhood, I would have said absolutely, and they all burned down. So on a macro scale, there's more we need to learn about fire behavior and the influence of topography and wind. And you may have heard about fire NATO, a fire vortex. They believe that's what happened in that area. I think the safest thing to say is we don't understand completely the science of fire, and in that particular incident, there's a lot more work to be done to understand and then subsequently to defend against something like that.
So unfortunately, Coffee Park was a house-to-house ignition, and so because during the first 24 hours there wasn't, it was all life safety and evacuation. There wasn't intervention from fire. So once the fire got into Coffee Park, the houses were so close to each other. They all had very good defensible space, But once one started and there was no intervention, the radiant heat that will persist for maybe 2 hours from one house caught the other house and caught the other house. So it was a different fire spread mechanism than what you will find on the preserve. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Carol?
Yes.
Could I just say one thing? Thank you, Forrest, first of all, and to Carol, both of you. I'm new here. I've only been here for 6 months. I'm familiar with fire. I've lived in California all my life. I was here during the Marble Cone fire. I lived on the peninsula. I lived in Southern California during the Laguna fire of '93. My neighborhood, we were starting to fill U-Hauls because they were running out of water. And so I'm very sensitive and very cognizant of fire and being fire wise and safe. And so I just wanted to thank you for being so proactive. And Forrest, Carol came today, and Ray and I share a driveway and we're side by side. So Carol came and updated, did the preliminary updates to our FMPs. And I think heading it off is always the best thing that we can do, and I really truly am sensitive to everyone that had the fear that you all had here 2 years ago. I watched it every single day from down south. And so we're trying to do our part and lean in and help you do yours. So thank you, and thank you, and thank you.
That's all we can ask, so thank you. And thanks everybody for being here, especially thanks Carol,